I think it's going. Oh yeah, it's going.
Is it working?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to do the autonomic nervous system. Okay. And so I'm just going to sort of walk you through this. And hi, Michelle. Study hard. It's a big test coming up. So, and so the first thing I'm taking a look at here is the efferent nervous system. And of course, the efferent nervous system can be divided up into two parts. There's the autonomic, and then there's the somatic. The somatic nervous system is voluntary. The autonomic is involuntary. And it's noteworthy, the only thing that we can do in our life is contract skeletal muscle. Everything else is involuntary. Ready? Now, you guys did your myology exam, and so you guys know, we sort of talked about this, but when you have an efferent motor neuron, there's going to be a connection from your spinal cord, and the motor neuron is going to go directly to the muscle, right? Okay? And that's what you expect, so that's good. And of course, right here, that'll be acetylcholine. Okay? When I'm dealing with the autonomic nervous system, I don't have one motor neuron, I have two. Okay? And you can see the two of them are synapsing, sort of there in the middle, and I'm going to call that a ganglion. Whenever you have a knot of nervous tissue, we call it a ganglion. Okay, it's doing something. It's not a problem. And the result is that these two neurons here are going to have two separate names. This will be the preganglionic neuron. This will be the postganglionic neuron. So with very few exceptions, when I'm dealing with the viscera, the autonomic nervous system always has two neurons. And there's a reason for this. You will see it. I'll explain it later. Okay? Alrighty, and again, what is the somatic nervous system? It's skeletal muscle only. Autonomic nervous system is glands, heart, smooth muscle, digestive, respiratory, all of that would be, autonomic. It's involuntary. Here's now taking a cross-section of the spinal cord. A lot of review here. And so you guys remember that now I'm sort of comparing contrast. We have both afferent and efferent nervous systems shown here. The afferent nervous system will always take afferent sensory information, and it's going to go through the dorsal root, and then of course it's going to enter into the posterior gray horn. Okay, and then what it's frequently does, it's going to synapse with some interneurons, which could either be excitatory or inhibitory. We'll just assume excitatory, I suppose. Now, again, if the efferent system is the somatic, it's voluntary, and what I notice, this motor neuron is going to be housed in that anterior gray horn. The anterior gray horn always deals with voluntary skeletal muscle. But if it's involuntary, this preganglionic neuron is going to be housed in the lateral gray horn. Are you guys all with me? Okay. Michelle, are you with me? Listen up. Study hard. Okay? And I think that's good. So far, so good? Alrighty, neurotransmitters of the autonomic nervous system. I want to talk really quick, I really should add this, but I want to talk really briefly by way of review on the somatic nervous system. Okay? When it was the somatic nervous system, the effect where there's a neuromuscular junction, the neurotransmitter was always what? You wrote it on your exam. Acetylcholine. I think I asked you that, didn't I?
Yeah.
Acetylcholine. I had to get to the enzyme, acetylcholine esterase. So it's always what, everybody? Acetylcholine. Now, you guys remember when we were talking about the, you're going to see it's a little bit different here with the autonomic nervous system. But you guys remember when you have the autonomic nervous system, you've got these two divisions. You have a sympathetic and a parasympathetic. And of course, both systems are both stimulating your viscera at the same time. But if there's more parasympathetic activity and there's less sympathetic, I'm going to go in a more restful state in general. Okay? But if there's more sympathetic and less parasympathetic, then I'm going to be in a heightened state. And so what I note here is that when there's a lot of parasympathetic activity, I'm maintaining my set points, there's a lack of stress, I'm at rest, all tends to be well. When there's a lot of sympathetic activity, well, this is not necessarily a bad thing, but there's a lot of deviations from the set point. That's when you're exercising, which is healthy to do, okay? But you could have physiological, psychological stress or, other deviations. And what that's going to do is it's going to elicit a response in your body to address the stressors. We'll talk more about that in a second. Okay? And so in the discussion that we just did with that threshold, do you guys remember? Okay? And so what you had this resting membrane potential. And if you recall back then, if I brought it closer to threshold, something would happen. If I brought it further away from threshold, something would not happen. And so what happens here is this. Here I have the same effector, but I have both a sympathetic and a parasympathetic stimulation. This could be the heart. So there's both sympathetic and parasympathetic. And what I note is where I have the ganglion, the neurotransmitter is always acetylcholine. But it's different when I get at the effectors. When it's sympathetic, the nervous system will be norepinephrine. If it's parasympathetic, the neurotransmitter will be acetylcholine. So let's say this is the heart. If there's more parasympathetic activity, dumped on the heart will be more acetylcholine and less norepinephrine, and the heart rate will go slower and the beat will be less vigorous. But now if it flips, now there's more sympathetic activity and less parasympathetic activity. Now there's going to be more norepinephrine, and the little pacemakers are going to go get closer to the threshold, and the result is the heart's going to beat faster, and it's going to beat with greater vigor. Do you guys see? Do you see the difference? Okay? And so those are the neurotransmitters, and you want to know what's going on with all those neurotransmitters, and that is so important for your clinicals, because you're going to have people who come in and there is something going on with parasympathetic, and you're going to have in your drawer an EpiPen, and you're going to give them some epinephrine. It'll have the same effect as norepinephrine. You're going to get that heart beating up faster. Do you guys follow? But you're putting it in the bloodstream. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Oh, you look like you were getting excited. So.
Oh yeah, because I just had a realization.
See what?
No.
Right. So far, so good?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just didn't know that that's what an EpiPen did.
Yes. Yes. What it does, I'll tell you what. Here's what the EpiPen. If somebody's allergic to a bee sting, okay, and the bee puts the venom in the bloodstream. Okay. Now they're allergic, and so the result is then they're in their bloodstream. And the result is, since they've been sensitized to it, their mast cells and basophils secrete histamine, which now causes massive systemic vasodilation the blood pressure is dropping critically to the point where I'm not going to get blood to the brain. We have a medical emergency. So you give them the EpiPen, the epinephrine now is going to cause a what response? A sympathetic, and the blood vessels will now vasoconstrict. That will save their life. You will get this in your nursing school. So this is an important foundation. Is that okay? Yeah. So, of everything we talk about the nervous system, we're building up. The top of the mountain is this, with what we're doing right now, autonomic nervous. Then the spinal cord, and then it just goes down. Okay. So this is the pinnacle. So let's talk about this. Okay. So for 50 juicy points, illustrate that. Michelle. Spelling counts. Well, maybe not. Well, I'm going to describe it to you, and I am going to tell you what's going to be on your exam. Okay, and so what you will have is you're going to have a matching. And there's going to be 4 options. You'll have S will stand for sympathetic. P will stand for B will stand for both sympathetic and parasympathetic. N will stand for neither sympathetic nor parasympathetic. Those are the only options. But it's harder than you think, so you want to study this. Is that okay? Alrighty, so good. So here I have a map of the autonomic nervous system. This side is parasympathetic. This side is sympathetic. Okay? The way it's designed is the solid lines are the preganglionic neurons. The dashed lines are the postganglionic neurons. Do you guys see? You need to look at your sheet because it's not clear on this overhead because of just the way it is, right? And so I want to just point out a whole lot of observations, and then what I'm going to do is I am going to give you the pop quiz. Okay, we'll just get through the whole thing this way. And so a couple of observations is this. Actually, let me just tell you this. Let's say, you walk out, you're sleeping at night. Let's say you're sleeping at night, and of course, you guys know that there's a whole lot of parasympathetic activity. Do you guys see? Okay? And so at that point, with a lot of parasympathetic activity, your heart goes in idle mode, respiratory goes in idle mode, and all critical issues go in their idle rest mode. Do you guys follow? Non-critical systems, such as digestive, will actually allow to go a little faster, okay, because they're non-critical. But let's say you go out to your car tonight, and it's really dark out there, isn't it? The lighting is poor. They don't give, for some reason, I don't think they give Northern Essex a lot of money for maintenance. Something's going on. I don't know what's going on. And you go walking out to your car, it's real dark, and then you've got this shady individual that's hiding behind your car. You with me? And as you're approaching, and all of a sudden he jumps up and he screams bloody murder. What happens to you? Your heart rate goes up. Your ventilation rate goes up. You scream. You throw your books. Your hair stands up. You break out into a cold sweat. You wet your pants. Do you guys follow? You're having a whole body response. Okay? When you're sleeping at night, you're not having a whole body response. What happens, like your car, it just goes in idle mode. Alrighty? But when you put the car in gear and you put your foot on the gas, now all the systems of the car are working together to get you from point A to point B. So what I'm seeing here is this. with the sympathetic, you're going to see that there's going to be some very short preganglionic neurons. And as they come out, you're going to see that they begin to synapse. They're making connections. Because what's going to happen is, just like out in the parking lot, I'm going to have a whole body response. I'm going to have a what, everybody? A whole body response. So, when it comes to the parasympathetic system, preganglionic neurons are large, postganglionic neurons are small. When it's the sympathetic, the preganglionic neurons are small, generally, there's exceptions. The postganglionic are large. And the reason is, the moment they get out of the spinal cord, they're going to be synapsing, making connections so that all systems have an integrated response. Do you guys follow? Because when that guy screams, you have a choice. You either have to do a fight or you do a flight. Do you guys see? You either do a fight or a flight. And you need sharp reflexes, you need blood to your muscles, you need to, the whole 9 yards. And any non-critical systems such as the digestive, urinary are dampened. Reproductive would be dampened. All of that would be dampened, okay? Because I'm going to funnel all resources into fight and flight. What does that mean? Muscles and brain, primarily. Okay? Alrighty? So that's good. Okay. When we are, there's a lot of and let's do some other observations before we go on. I also know with the parasympathetic nervous system, the preganglionic neurons are coming from cranial nerves, select cranial nerves, and 3 sacral segments. That's it. The sympathetic is coming from thoracic and the first 2 lumbar segments. So now that's sort of cool, because what I'm starting to see here is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems are now physically 2 different locations. Everything is divided up, okay? And we can see it right there as well. And so when you're sleeping at night, and there's a lot of parasympathetic activity, and there's not much sympathetic activity, what happens, your entire system goes into rest mode, your metabolism goes slow, and we have a word for that metabolism. We say that you've entered into your basal metabolic rate. That's not on your sheet, but that's called the basal metabolic rate. The basal metabolic rate is your idle. Okay? And I want you to note that as this neuron comes in contact with the various organs, you don't see a lot of synapsing. It's just basically indicating to the organelles, go into your rest mode, go into that basal metabolic rate. Okay? But now all of a sudden you're going to have that fight and flight response. And at this point I need a whole body response to address a stressor. It could be psychological, it could be physiological. When you're in the hospitals and the emergency room, you will have physiological stress entering in on that gurney or whatever it is. And when that happens, there are going to be signs and symptoms that indicate that there is a fight and flight response and that there's a lot of sympathetic activity. Okay? And so whether it's in the parking lot or it's due to an auto accident or some other tragedy or whatever, or just fear or whatever, what has happened is a lot of sympathetic activity coming out, and there's a lot of integration so that I have a whole body response. Certain systems are going to be accentuated and other systems will be dampened so I can redirect resources to a fight and flight response. And so when that happens, what you'll note is ventilation rate increases, heart rate increases, digestive decreases, okay, urinary reproductive decrease, and I'm going to have a fight and flight response. Some other interesting observations. You can also see here, there's no rhyme or reason for this, but your sweat glands only have sympathetic stimulation. And so when the person's having that fight and flight response, they might break out into what's called a cold sweat. They're sweating and thermoregulation is not the issue. It's just getting in the way. Okay? At the same time, when they're scared out of their wits, their hair may stand up. The erector pili muscle only has sympathetic activity. So what's it doing? Well, it is making you, I suppose if you were Sammy, making you a little bit more scary. You guys remember that from the integument? Okay? In us, it happens, but it's probably it is vestigial. It doesn't work anymore. Okay? Another one that's really important for ANP2 and your clinicals, and this is where the EpiPen comes in as well, is that the blood vessels only have sympathetic activity. Blood vessels only have sympathetic innervation, is what I should say. And so what happens? Watch, when there's a lot of parasympathetic activity, by extension, there's less sympathetic. The result is the blood vessels will now vasodilate. Okay? But when there's a lot of sympathetic activity, now they will vasoconstrict. Okay? Alrighty? Something else is interesting. But right here, right over your kidney, you have a gland here that's called the adrenal gland. Okay? Now, the adrenal gland actually consists of two glands in one. There's the adrenal cortex, the outer part, and then there's the adrenal medulla, which is the central part. Okay? And you can also see, interestingly, that you have a preganglionic neuron that is going through, and this is an exception, that's coming in contact with the adrenal medulla. It looks here, I have to tell you this, it looks here like it's coming in contact with the cortex, but it's actually going into the medulla. That's important. It's going into the central part. It's going into the what, everybody? Central part. And so when you have a whole lot of sympathetic activity, what's going to happen is the adrenal medulla is going to be stimulated, and what it's going to now secrete into the bloodstream is this hormone called norepinephrine and epinephrine. And you know, let's say you went out to your car and this guy screams bloody murder, and you know, your heart rate goes up, ventilation rate goes up, you break up in a cold sweat, your hair stands up, you wet your pants, you lose your meal, everything has been affected. And then you realize it's just Professor Waves. Does your blood pressure immediately go down? No. It's going to take a little while. You're mad anyway, okay? Does your heart rate immediately go down? No. When's the last time you're scared? No? Well, try it sometimes. And, you know, as you ventilate, it takes a while to get back into that rest mode. Do you guys follow? Okay? And the reason that it doesn't immediately go back is simply because, you guys remember, when I'm dealing with these hormones, the neurotransmitter for the sympathetic division is what, everybody? Norepinephrine. So that's the neurotransmitter that's being secreted into the synaptic clefts. But now the same chemical is now being dumped into the bloodstream. At this point, that same chemical, norepinephrine, is going to get a different name. I'm going to call it a hormone. Now I'm going to call it a hormone. If the chemical was at the a neuromuscular junction, I will call it a neurotransmitter. But if it's in the bloodstream, I'll give it the designation a hormone. Okay? And so this is now in circulation. And it's coming in contact with your heart, so even though you don't want your heart to be fast, it's going to continue to be fast, okay? You may not want to slow down your ventilation, but you're still going to be ventilating fast. It may take you a little while before you're really interested in eating anything again. You guys follow? And your blood pressure is going to remain high because the norepinephrine is bathing these blood vessels, okay? All right? I think think that's good. So pop quiz. You guys ready? Okay. See how you do. This one, you feel free to look at this. It won't be available when you do your quiz, though. Is that okay? So just okay. Long preganglionic neurons. Remember, the answers is S, P, B, or N.
S.
I'm going to say it again. Long preganglionic neurons.
P.
Parasympathetic. Good. Okay. Involves the anterior gray horn. Look on page 2. You can look. You can peek this time, okay? See if you can do it without peeking, but if you have to peek, just so you can see where the answers are so you know how to approach your studies. Is that okay? Okay, involves the anterior gray horn.
SM.
It would be neither because that's the somatic nervous system. I'm dealing with the autonomic nervous system. Okay? Is that clear? Okay. Predominates when you're sleeping.
P.
Yes. Utilizes acetylcholine.
B.
Both at the ganglion. Okay. Utilizes only acetylcholine.
P.
Parasympathetic. Nice. Okay, good. Heart is innervated by what?
S.
B. Both. Both sympathetic and parasympathetic. Do you guys see how you need to practice this? Okay, good. Fight and flight response.
S.
Sympathetic. Has a sympathetic chain ganglion. That's what this is called, by the way. I already told you, but what is it?
S.
Sympathetic. Okay, good. Involves sacral spinal segments.
P.
P. Parasympathetic. Liver is innervated by.
B.
Both. Yep, B. Blood pressure going up.
S.
Yep. Blood pressure going down.
P. Both.
I would say neither. Okay, because what happens is when blood pressure is going up, there's sympathetic activity that's a tough one. I would have to think about that one. All right, but the blood vessels are vasoconstricting. When there's a lack of sympathetic, and it has nothing to do with parasympathetic, okay, then there is, then the blood pressure is going to go down. Is that okay? If you said S, I'd probably have to give you credit, I suppose. So, I don't know. I'd have to think about that. Okay, adrenal gland is innervated by.
S.
Yep, S only. Okay, good. Involves thoracic spinal segments.
S.
You wet your pants.
S. Both. No.
Oh no, S. No, you're right. S. Sympathetic. Yes. Yeah, it's sympathetic. Yep, exactly. Okay, good. All right, I think that's good. You guys all set? So what to do is using that SPBN, you want to go through that and just go through the various images and just get real clear on it. Is that okay? That's just to help guide you and compartmentalize, all this information in a way that's hopefully will be really useful when you get into your clinicals. All right, you guys. Well, I wasn't going to do that, but I did it.